you got this one courageous goofball who says, no, you're wrong, I believe not X. Pretty strong temptation in the human race, if you think back on some historical episodes you might be familiar with, to say, at best, X, we're not paying attention to you. More often, at worst, X, you die. Dissenter, you die. So Mill has set himself an intentionally difficult task here in chapter 2. Why should I listen to this one person? And the argument, as you may recall, is pretty complicated in chapter 2. I'm giving you a simple version of it because we only have 50 minutes. But the main three arguments that Mill will give us in chapter 2 are these. 1, fallibilism. Fallibilism. You might be wrong. 99.9999999% of the people might be wrong. That one person who disagrees could actually be right and us not know it. And I know that seems really surprising because we have a tendency to think if that many people think something, of course we've got to be right. Mill does not believe in the majority rules epistemology. Mill believes we can never know for certain. So that other person might be right. Secondly, let's switch our presupposition about who's right and who's wrong. Now we're going with the way we usually like to think about things. The majority has got the truth. Let's just stipulate that without worrying about how the majority got to the truth. But let's just imagine, what if 99.99999% of us were right, and there's that one courageous weirdo saying, no, you're wrong, but he's actually wrong. Well, why should we listen to him then? Just by definition, that person is wrong. It seems like he has nothing to offer us. Here's one of Mill's most interesting arguments. He says that person has a lot to offer you. Why? Fallibilism. Because you actually need tests for your beliefs in order to have more support for taking them seriously. That one person who disagrees with you is doing you a favor. They're giving you the opportunity to test your belief and thereby come to a better understanding of how it withstands a test. Because again, just by hypothesis, in this case, you're right, so it is going to withstand the test. So that person gives us an opportunity to understand how our belief withstands disagreement, withstands test. Also, Mill says, that person gives us an opportunity to even understand the elements of our beliefs better. Mill was not a Christian, and he thought that Christianity had a lot of potential, that it could help to lead people into a better way of living, but sadly, that didn't happen very often because he thought people in Victorian Britain who were Christians didn't even listen to the other point of view anymore. And they just went around spouting a dead dogma. Jesus is love. I'll just do whatever everyone around me does. And when you have somebody who says, why should you be a Christian? Don't you know there are reasons to think that the Bible is conflicted, etc.? That person may actually get you thinking more fully about your beliefs than you would have done otherwise. And maybe with that person's help, that dissenter's help, you'll actually start to come up with reasons why you believe what you believe, and you might come to a deeper understanding of its meaning. So rational support for your belief is a good thing that a dissenter can help you get, but a deeper understanding of the content of your belief is also a really important thing that a dissenter can do for you. The third major argument that Mill gives us in the second chapter about why we ought to have complete freedom to state our beliefs in conversation with one another is because the first two cases we were talking about are not actually all that common. Those are the cases where one side's completely right and the other side's completely wrong. The third case, he says, is the most common. And this is the one where both sides are sort of right and sort of wrong. And it makes sense, given his fallibilism, that it would be pretty unlikely for any side to have the complete truth. That means we need one another. We need one another's input in conversation. If I let myself listen to what somebody else who disagrees with me has to say, I might learn something that gets me closer to the complete truth, even though I'll never be certain about it. But it will get me closer to the complete truth than I would have been otherwise. So, good reasons to listen to one another, and as Mill says, closing out chapter 2, it would probably be a nice idea to reason with one another fairly instead of sarcastically and calling one another jerks. But even then, I'm not going to give you any laws against calling each other jerks. You can just shun one another socially if people aren't reasoning with you politely. Still, we ought to reason with one another. What about our behavior? Now things get dicier in chapter 3. Should I be left completely free to act however I want? We start to come much more close to harming other people when we're talking about behavior. And Mill's careful as a writer and as a thinker. And you may remember that at the beginning of chapter 3, he reminds us some speech, some things that look like they're just discussion, they actually kind of count as behavior in the end. If somebody came in here right now and said, nuclear weapon about to explode in this building in 22 seconds. Well, that's kind of an action because it gets us all in a rioting state and we'll trample one another on the way out. But usually in chapter 3, Mill is primarily concerned with just behavior, straightforward behavior. Should I be allowed to act in the ways I want to act, as long as I'm not harming other people? Mill says yes, as long as I'm not harming other people. And that means we're going to have to put up with a lot of stuff from one another that's kind of irritating. I don't like your hairstyle. I don't like the way you are developing your individuality by wearing your hair. Why should I have to put up with that? Mill has reasons. Again, the first one is we're not infallible. There he goes again. We are not infallible. Maybe your hairstyle is great, and maybe I am just a fool for not understanding the value of your experimental hairstyle. I could very well be wrong, and that hairstyle could really help you develop yourself as a person. Usually the kinds of things that we get ticked off with one another about are a lot more dicey than hairstyles. I don't like the liquids you're drinking. I don't like the company you hang out with. I don't like the dances you do, and so forth. Secondly, Mill says people need to develop in their own ways in order to become individuals. It's that emphasis again on eudaimonistic self-fulfillment. My idea about who you ought to be, who knows, maybe I'd try to make everybody in the world into a philosophy professor because it's just so great for me, it's definitely got to be the right thing for you. You don't want to be a philosophy professor. Where do I get off telling you how you ought to develop yourself? And that's Mill's point. I shouldn't do that because I can't know what is the best way for you to develop yourself. Maybe you don't know either, but you're a lot closer to the source on that question than I am. So let's leave you free to knock around for a little while and try to figure that out for yourself without an authority figure screwing it up for you. Mill uses this phrase, experiments of living. He says there should be experiments of living. It's that empiricism, it's that experimentalism, so that people can try different options. It's not very easy when you're 18 or 21 to know exactly what you want to do for the next 40 years of your life. Try some things out. And as long as they're not harming other people, they're good things for you to be doing because you will learn from them, even if you make mistakes along the way. Mill says that people are like trees and not machines. They develop in their own ways. Even if you've got two trees side by side that are oak trees, they're not going to look exactly the same. So we need to leave those trees free to develop as the special version of an oak tree that they are. Third, it's not only important to leave people free to move toward what will, because they chose it, be the best outcome for them. It's also important for us to leave people free to develop their inner states during that developmental process. So Mill is not only concerned with what you might end up doing for a living, how many cars you have in your garage, what kind of food you decide to devote yourself to. Are you going to be a locavore? Are you going to be a vegetarian? Are you going to be meat all the way? Those are important kinds of lifestyle choices for you to make, ultimately. But as you work through those options, Mill says, you develop your faculties. You learn to reason. You learn to trust your feelings or maybe not trust your feelings. You learn what your desires are. You learn how much strength of character you have, how much willpower you have. Those are things nobody else can put into you. Even if I were going to tell you and somehow make it stick, you will be a philosophy professor.